we can look to this model, or we can look to this diagram here, and just appreciate it as, okay, so this is just how we experience life. We have life events happen to us, and then we interpret the stuff that happens to us. What do we have here? What do we have here? That's right. We've got a little angel on one shoulder, we've got a little devil on the other shoulder, and what happens? That's right, we sometimes engage in intellectual debate with ourselves. Have you ever had an argument with yourself? I know I certainly have. I don't know if that's classed in some schools of thought as, completely insane or not, but I'm just being honest, right? I debate with myself, all right, as I'm working things out. Sometimes things will happen and I will automatically assume the worst. I will do. I make judgments, I make assumptions of people sometimes, all right? The only difference of what I've realized over the year, I'm just getting better at regulating. What I'm able to use, I'm actually able to use the quality of my emotional state as a means by which to gauge the health and the potential accuracy of my thinking, of my interpretation. All right, so I'm now giving you insight into how it is that you can really start regulating yourself effectively. We've got to become emotionally aware. Emotional awareness or emotional IQ, that's a common tag word these days, is critical. All right, and why is this critical? Because it's very, very difficult to capture thoughts. Right, thoughts pop into our mind, by the way. Right, so we can end up unconsciously responding to the thoughts that come in, assuming that they're automatically true right away without question. But here's the thing, the thoughts will trigger emotions. When we find ourselves experiencing an emotional state that is undesired in some way, be this anger, be this frustration, be this angst, be this fear, be this guilt, be this shame, be this whatever, we can either choose to run with the emotion and see where that takes us, which is 9 times out of 10, nowhere particularly useful, or we can just stop and say, where has this emotion come from? Right? Where did this come from? And I'm actually just going to use an example that I've already shared, but just to re-emphasize this. And it was a man that I used to model him just a little bit. He was on the public speaking circuit here in Scotland. A man that I used to and still do have quite an amount of admiration for. He's a phenomenal live speaker, trainer. His ability to captivate an audience and really take them on a journey is really something else. Now, he would invite me to go and join him at some of his live events. And this was back years ago when I was just starting out. And I remember going to one of these events with him, and I would kind of sit there watching him do his thing, and a form of deductive thinking would creep in just a little bit. So I start looking up to the guy and say, wow, he's just phenomenal. And as I was looking up to the guy, I just naturally put myself down. And then by the end of the event, I'm just saying, oh my goodness, I'll never be as good as him. I'll never be as good as you. And my mood literally plummeted for the rest of the day. Now, this is a real experience I had, by the way. This is when this model really just hit home for me, when it really started to make sense. Because I was able to capture the emotion, and rather than engaging the emotion and have the emotion overpower me, I ended up stepping on top of and out of it. So what was I thinking? And what I was able to identify, this is the first time in my life I'd ever done this, which is why it's an example that I share so often, because it was the most prominent experience that I had, the first time that I'd ever really regulated in this way. I was able to identify the way I interpreted this event was catastrophic by nature. Rather than simply being honoured that this man who I had huge admiration for invited me to partner with him on his speaking events, I ended up comparing myself to him. I've just given you the answer. Comparison. Compare and despair. I just dropped the ball there, didn't I? So I ended up entering into a state of compare and despair. I compared myself to him, ended up putting myself down, and as the day progressed, I ended up falling into this pit of despair. Right? It was a real thing, but I realised, I didn't capture the thinking. Now, before I stepped out of the emotion and said, what was I thinking? And, reviewed how it was I'd interpreted this circumstance or this situation, I would have said, oh, I'm just feeling sad, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling really low self-esteem today, I maybe contracted a mental illness, all right? But it was only in hindsight I could say, no. This is a basis for all personal responsibility. Rather than have my emotion manage me, which lives inside of me, by the way, I step out of it and say, no, what was I thinking? Was I listening to the little angel or was I listening to the little devil telling me that I'm no good? All right, now I'm using little angel, little devil. I'm not talking about little angels, little devils existing. I'm just saying that we need a metaphor that we can relate to the voices going on inside of our mind, because some of them will be helpful and productive and some of them will be completely undermining. Thoughts pop in from somewhere. I don't know where. And you might have a theory, but in fairness, there's a pretty good chance that you don't know where thoughts come from either. They just come in from somewhere. Thoughts are a mystery in the same way that growth is also a mystery, all right? But this now is essentially growth when we start regulating in this way, all right? So interpretation, all of this happens inside of our minds. Only then once we have become clear on the thinking style that we engaged in, can we then choose our response? Can we then choose a response? All right, because the response or the reaction for me back then could have been, I'm going to go home and beat myself up and feel sad about myself. Maybe go and choose a new vocation or engage in some low self-esteem for a few weeks and maybe go to a doctor and see if I can get some medication. Or I can just engage and say, my goodness, I engaged in a really unhelpful thinking pattern right now. I'm gonna really work hard to not do that again. And that was it. So I took a response. A few weeks later, I was invited out to another speaking gig. Next time round, I was aware of the enemy. All right, I knew what to look out for. So instead, I sat there and didn't enter into the state of compare and despair. Instead, I took notes. I looked to identify those parts of his presentation that I admired the most, and instead I engaged in a little bit of neuro-linguistic programming and modelled him. What it was, his strengths were, what I could see his weaknesses were, so that I could start to improve my public communication. All right, which is a significantly more helpful approach, looking at what we can learn from people rather than comparing and despairing. Just an example, right? Just an experience that I had, but I'm sure on some level you can relate to this. But I also want to show you how practical self-regulation is. All right? Next time you have an emotional state that you don't like, you either allow yourself to be overcome by it, or you stop. What was I thinking? Because if you've just validated a thought that wasn't valid, well, that's on you. All right? Now listen, you've got to master this first before you're going to be able to influence other people, right? Healing doesn't work, right? We're kind of done with the magic and the energy healing. There's lots of people out there who claim to be able to heal people in this way, but people don't need healed. They need educated, all right? They need educated, significantly more mature, and it's also then duplicatable because people can share knowledge and understanding with others. Not everyone has the capacity to do magic or heal energy. So, outcomes, consequences. I grew in response. All right, I've become the internationally esteemed communicator that I've become today. I'll let you make a decision on that one. And then I have more life events, and then the cycle continues. All right, so this is where everything happens. This is where it all goes down, all right? And this is where we've now got to start really making a decision for ourselves. What is the difference between the brain and the mind? Are we just mind with some neurons going on and some sparks that can contract illnesses and mental health diseases? Or is there a mind at play? And if there is a mind at play, what are the components of this? How does it work? Because this is what we need to understand if we are to go on to live effective and fruitful lives. And we have the capacity for thought. We acknowledge this. We can see this. Thoughts pop in. We do not get to determine the thoughts that pop in, but we do get to choose through our free will the thoughts that we engage in, the thoughts that we validate, and the thoughts that we disregard and reject. Because we have an ability to reason. Not just with other people, we have an ability to reason with ourselves. Right? This is the beautiful thing here. This is what it means to self-regulate, to self-reason, to reason with oneself. I'm feeling really sad right now. I'm feeling really angry right now because I think that person's just looked at me in a really undermining way. But did he? Or did she? Is this true? Are there facts and evidence to substantiate this assumption that I'm making? Or am I just blowing things out of proportion and getting a little bit catastrophic in my thinking? All right, this is how this works. Because our ability to reason with ourselves and the choices that we make will establish and determine the emotional state that we experience. All right, so this is an education just for you. All right, because if you are educated in this, and even if I hope I'm not telling you anything new here, because if you're nodding your head and saying, yes, I do this, I'm there, fantastic, Caitlin's teaching some real validation for me, well, guess what? You are best poised to start sharing this with other people. The world needs this stuff, friends. Right, seriously, these young children are getting told they have conditions and illnesses and they're bipolar and ADHD. ADHD, by the way, who's that on? Is that really on the children, or is that on the parents who are not potentially spending time and giving attention to their children? Right, it's easy to put people in boxes and assign labels. It's difficult. It's difficult. It takes hard work. It takes discipline, persistence to learn to self-regulate, which is why most people don't do it. It's easier to have a mental health condition than what it is to self-regulate. Right, and this is the difference between those who have and those who have not. Right, those who learn to regulate will learn to control themselves and make wise, well-informed decisions. They'll go on to build things with their lives. Those who don't, well, few people will ever really take seriously anyway.